The smell of fresh paint has no business lingering in a house where a 62-year-old widow lives alone. I got home early from work that Tuesday afternoon, looking forward to a quiet cup of tea on my back porch. Instead, I pulled into my driveway to find a white commercial van parked near my garage. The front door stood wide open, propped with a brick from my garden. Heavy footsteps thumped across the hardwood floors above my head. I didn't panic. I just set my purse on the entryway table and walked upstairs, my sensible shoes making no sound against the runner rug. I reached the landing and turned toward my master bedroom. The furniture, my late husband's oak dresser, my reading chair. The antique vanity had been shoved to the center of the room and covered with cheap plastic tarps. Two men in overalls were rolling thick bubblegum pink paint over my serene beige walls. Standing in the center of the chaos was my daughter-in-law Vanessa holding a color swatch. My son David stood next to her looking vaguely uncomfortable, but doing absolutely nothing to stop it. To my sheer disbelief, my 85-year-old parents were sitting on the edge of my plastic-wrapped bed watching the spectacle. Vanessa turned and spotted me in the doorway. She didn't flinch. She just smiled brightly as if she were the host, and I was a slightly early guest. "We're renovating your master bedroom before moving in," she announced, crossing her arms in satisfaction. She nodded toward the hideous pink wall, clearly proud of her bold design choice. My parents actually laughed. A light, enabling chuckle. "Oh, Julia." My mother chimed in, waving a wrinkled hand. "Don't look so shocked. The kids need to save money, and this house is far too big for just you anyway." I stood in the doorway of the room I had slept in for 30 years. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply looked at the painters who had paused their rollers, sensing the sudden drop in the room's temperature. The silence stretched until David finally looked away, staring hard at the floorboards. Vanessa shifted her weight, clearly waiting for me to melt into the role of the accommodating grandmother. She expected me to sigh, offer them dinner, and quietly move my belongings into the damp guest room down the hall. Instead, I stepped into the room and addressed the taller of the two painters. "Who hired you?" The man blinked, lowering his roller. He pointed the dripping tool toward my son. David did, ma'am." Said it was his house. I kept my voice entirely level. "It is not his house. I am the sole owner of this property. I did not authorize this work, and I want you to stop immediately. Pack your equipment and leave." Vanessa's smug smile vanished. "Julia, be reasonable. We already paid the deposit. You can't just kick them out. We're moving in this weekend. Our lease is up." I ignored her completely. I kept my eyes on the painters who were already untying their drop cloths. They recognized a bad situation when they saw one. "Please carry your cans carefully," I instructed them. "If you drip pink paint on my hardwood, I will send the cleaning bill to your company." David finally found his voice, stepping forward with his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Mom, come on. Don't do this in front of everybody. We just wanted to surprise you and get a head start." "You certainly surprised me," I replied, stepping aside to let the painters carry their ladders out to the hallway. My father stood up from the bed, leaning heavily on his cane. "Julia, you're making a scene. Let the boy move in. He's your son." "This is my home, Dad," I answered, not raising my voice a single decibel. "Not a boarding house." Once the painters were out the front door, I turned back to the four of them. "Take the plastic off my furniture. Then all of you leave." Vanessa's face flushed an angry crimson. She grabbed her purse, storming past me without a word. David trailed behind her like a scolded puppy, and my parents followed, shaking their heads in profound disappointment. As I began cleaning the mess, I noticed Vanessa had left her leather notebook on my dresser. The house was wonderfully quiet again, though the sharp scent of pink paint gave me a mild headache. I made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea and sat at the kitchen island opening Vanessa's leather notebook. I didn't feel guilty about looking. If you leave your battle plans on your enemy's territory, you lose the right to privacy. The pages were filled with detailed budgets and timelines. Under a section labeled The Big Move, I saw exactly what they had planned. They weren't just moving in to save money. They had scheduled to take over the master suite, convert my downstairs office into a playroom, and move my belongings into the unfinished basement. There was even a line item noting that my Social Security checks could cover the monthly utilities, freeing up their income for a new SUV. I didn't tear the pages. I didn't cry over my son's complicity. I just closed the notebook and finished my tea. The next morning, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was Mom. I answered expecting a lecture about family loyalty. Instead, her voice was panicked. "Julia, why did the police come to us?" I paused, setting my mug down. "What do you mean? An officer just left our porch. He came asking for David. Apparently, the painters called the non-emergency line to report a theft of services. David's deposit check bounced, and he used our address on the work order so you wouldn't see the invoice in the mail." I let out a slow, controlled breath. David had written a bad check and hidden behind his grandparents' mailbox to avoid my detection. "That sounds like David's problem to solve, Mom," I replied smoothly. "I suggest he calls the painting company and pays what he owes before they escalate it." "But they came to our house," she wailed. "You need to fix this, Julia. Give him the money to pay them." "No," I answered. I ended the call and placed the phone face down. The time for rescuing a 30-year-old man was over. By noon, a local locksmith was drilling the old brass fixtures off my front back and garage doors. The heavy clunk of the new deadbolt sliding into place was the most comforting sound I had heard all week. I paid the man in cash, pocketed the only 2 shiny new keys in existence, and drove straight to my bank. When my husband passed away 5 years ago, he left a joint credit card open with David, as an authorized user meant strictly for extreme emergencies. I had rarely checked the statements trusting my son. I sat across from a personal banker and asked for a 3-year transaction history. The printout told a very clear story. Small charges, at first gasoline, a quick grocery run, then larger ones, restaurant tabs, online shopping, a resort booking in Florida last spring. "Close the account," I instructed the banker, sliding the printout back across the mahogany desk. "We can just remove his name and issue you a new card, Mrs. Gardner," the young man offered politely. "No. Close it entirely. I want the balance paid from my checking, and I want the line of credit permanently dissolved." I walked out of the bank feeling 10 pounds lighter. I didn't draft a long emotional text message to David explaining my feelings. I didn't demand an apology for the stolen money or the attempted home invasion. Words were useless against people who viewed you only as a resource. When I returned home, I gathered the few boxes David and Vanessa had managed to sneak into my garage before the paint incident. I loaded them into the trunk of my SUV. I thought cutting the financial cord would send a clear enough message, but I knew entitlement was a stubborn disease. They needed a physical boundary to understand the new reality. I drove across town to their apartment complex, unloaded the boxes onto the concrete walkway outside their ground floor unit, and drove away without knocking. Sunday evening arrived with a predictable invitation. My parents asked me over for a traditional pot roast dinner. I knew exactly what it was, but I dressed neatly, grabbed a bottle of sparkling cider, and drove over. Avoidance is a tactic for the weak, and I had nothing to hide. When I walked into my parents' dining room, David and Vanessa were already seated at the table. Vanessa shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass, but I simply took my seat, unfolded my linen napkin, and placed it on my lap. We ate in suffocating silence for 15 minutes. The clinking of silverware against porcelain echoed in the tense room. Finally, my father cleared his throat, setting his fork down with a heavy thud. "Julia, we need to discuss this nonsense." He started, his tone dripping with patriarchal authority. David's credit card was declined at the grocery store yesterday, and he told us, "You changed the locks on your own house. You are tearing this family apart over a little paint." I chewed a piece of carrot, swallowed, and wiped my mouth. I closed my credit card because David used it to fund a vacation to Florida, among other things. And I changed my locks because people who write bouncing checks and attempt unpermitted renovations do not get free access to my property. Vanessa slammed her hands on the table. "We are family. We need a place to live, and you are hoarding a 4-bedroom house. If you don't let us move in, you will never see your future grandchildren. I will make sure of it." David nodded along, emboldened by her anger. "Yeah, Mom, you're being incredibly selfish." I looked at my son, truly seeing the weak, grasping man he had become. I didn't argue. I didn't beg for a relationship with hypothetical grandchildren. "That is your choice, Vanessa?" I answered calmly. I stood up, placing my napkin neatly beside my half-eaten plate. "Thank you for the meal, Mom." The roast was lovely. They thought I was just being stubborn. They thought they could wait me out. They didn't know what I had planned for Monday morning. Monday morning brought a crisp breeze and a renewed sense of purpose. I spent the early hours in my master bedroom, armed with a heavy-duty roller and a gallon of premium primer. Covering the bright pink paint required physical effort, and my shoulders ached by noon. But watching the hideous color disappear beneath a thick coat of white was deeply therapeutic. Around 1 o'clock, my phone screen lit up. It was my security camera app. I wiped paint from my hands and tapped the screen. The live feed showed David and Vanessa standing on my front porch. David was aggressively jiggling his old key in the lock, his face twisting in frustration. Vanessa stood behind him holding a small potted plant, looking around nervously. "It won't turn." David muttered, his voice captured clearly by the porch microphone. Vanessa groaned, crossing her arms. "She's bluffing. Just force it." "The lease is up in 3 days, David. We can't afford rent without that credit card." I didn't call the police. I didn't use the two-way radio feature to yell at them. I simply tapped the record button, saving the footage directly to my phone, and went back to rolling primer on my walls. After 10 minutes of useless rattling and a few kicked planters, they finally gave up and drove away in Vanessa's car. By late afternoon, the room was restored to a neutral, peaceful white. I stood in the center of the space, looking at the empty corners. My parents were right about one thing: the house was too big for me. It required too much maintenance, the property taxes were climbing, and worst of all, its sheer size made it a permanent target for my son's greed. I took a quick shower, dressed in a sharp blazer, and drove downtown. I wasn't heading to a lawyer's office to draft threatening letters. I was heading to a local real estate agency that specialized in private, off-market sales. I sat across from an experienced agent named Helen. "I want to sell," I told her plainly, "as quickly and quietly as possible." Helen was exceptional at her job. She understood exactly what an off-market sale meant. "No for sale" sign hammered into the front lawn to alert the neighborhood. No public open houses with nosy neighbors tracking mud through the hallways. She reached out directly to her network of pre-approved buyers looking for large move-in-ready family homes in my zip code. While she worked, I began the quiet process of downsizing. I bought packing boxes in small batches, sneaking them into the house through the garage. Every evening after work, I packed up the life I had built over 3 decades. I kept the photo albums, the good silverware, and the small antique desk my husband loved. The rest, the heavy dining table, the oversized sofas, the endless guest room furniture, I arranged to be sold through an estate liquidator. David tried calling me a few times that week. I let the calls go to voicemail. His messages shifted from angry demands for the new house keys to whiny complaints about his landlord demanding the final month's rent. I deleted them all. On Thursday, Helen called with good news. A young couple, both doctors relocating to the area, had viewed the virtual tour she secretly recorded. They loved the house, especially the freshly primed master bedroom, and made a cash offer slightly above market value. They wanted a 30-day closing. I signed the digital paperwork on my tablet while eating a sandwich in my kitchen. The next day, I found my new home. It was a beautiful two-bedroom condo in a quiet, gated 55 older community near a small lake. It had large windows, a modern kitchen, and absolutely zero room for unexpected long-term guests. I paid the deposit with the funds I had saved over the years, completely independent of the accounts David had previously had access to. My boundaries were no longer just verbal. They were becoming structural, concrete. I was building a life where I didn't have to defend my space because I was the only one holding the keys. The 30 days passed in a blur of quiet efficiency. I managed to keep the entire process completely hidden from my family. I went to work, smiled at the grocery store, and occasionally replied to my mother's guilt-tripping text messages with a simple thumbs-up emoji. On a rainy Tuesday, while David and Vanessa were at work, the moving trucks arrived. I directed the crew with precision. By 3 in the afternoon, the large house echoed with emptiness. The liquidators had cleared out the heavy furniture the day before, and now my carefully chosen boxes were securely loaded, heading toward the lakefront condo. I walked through the empty rooms one last time. I paused in the master bedroom. Without the heavy oak furniture and the memories attached to them, it was just a box of drywall and wood floors. I didn't feel sad. I felt incredibly light. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from David. "Mom, Vanessa's pregnant. We really need to talk. We have to be out of the apartment by Friday. Please unlock the house." It was the ultimate guilt trip, the final card they had left to play. A baby. Under different circumstances, I would have been overjoyed. But I knew exactly what that child meant to them right now: leverage. A tool to force open my doors and drain my bank accounts. I stood in the empty entryway and typed my reply. "I'm happy for you both. The house is completely empty now. You can come by on Friday morning." I hit send, knowing exactly how they would interpret that message. They would assume they had won. They would assume I had cleared out the furniture to make room for their things, and that I was retreating to the basement or a guest room, just as Vanessa's leather notebook had dictated. I locked the front door for the final time, dropped the keys into the realtor's lockbox on the porch, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. Friday morning arrived with bright sunshine. I woke up in my new condo, the morning light reflecting beautifully off the lake outside my window. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, arranged my favorite books on the shelves, and settled onto my balcony with a novel. The security of the gated community meant nobody could even reach my front door without clearance from the guardhouse. At exactly 10:00 a.m., my phone began to vibrate violently on the patio table. It was David. I let it ring. It stopped, then started again immediately. Then a text from Vanessa came through in all capital letters. "Where are you? Who are these people?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark flavor. I could perfectly picture the scene unfolding miles away. They had likely pulled up to the curb with a rented U-Haul ready to claim their prize, only to find the new owners, the two doctors, directing their own moving crew up the driveway. I finally answered the phone on the 4th attempt. Mom, David shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "What is going on?" "There's a moving truck here, and some guy is telling me he owns the house. Did you rent it out?" "No, David." I answered, my voice as calm as the lake water below me. "I sold it." The closing was yesterday. Silence stretched over the line, heavy and suffocating. I could hear Vanessa in the background demanding to know what I was saying. "Sold it," David finally choked out. "But where are we supposed to go? Our lease is up today." You said this house was empty. It was empty, I replied smoothly. I cleared out so the new owners could move in. I told you, you are adults. You need to figure out your own housing. I am not your safety net anymore. Vanessa snatched the phone. You sold the house out from under us. We're having a baby. You are a monster. Congratulations on the baby, Vanessa, I said. I wish you the best of luck. I ended the call and blocked both of their numbers. The fallout was entirely predictable, but beautifully distant. Over the next few days, my parents left a series of frantic, scolding voicemails. They accused me of abandoning my family, of being heartless, and of embarrassing them in front of their friends. I listened to them once just to ensure there were no actual emergencies, and then I blocked their numbers as well. If they wanted to support David and Vanessa's entitlement, they could do it under their own roof, with their own checkbooks. I was officially out of the business of funding other people's bad decisions. I heard through a mutual friend a few weeks later that David and Vanessa had been forced to move into my parents' cramped spare bedroom. The irony was not lost on me. Vanessa, who had so eagerly planned to relegate me to a basement, was now living out of suitcases in a house smelling of mothballs, dealing with my mother's constant, overbearing presence. I didn't gloat. I simply let them go. My new life at the lake condo was exactly what I needed. I joined a local gardening club, started taking watercolor classes on Thursday evenings, and slept soundly through the night. Nobody demanded my money. Nobody tried to repaint my walls without asking. Nobody treated me like an obsolete piece of furniture taking up valuable space. Sometimes setting a boundary means having uncomfortable conversations, but other times, the most powerful thing a woman can do is simply pack her bags, change the locks, and remove herself from the equation entirely. I don't expect a dramatic reunion in the future. If David ever grows up and learns to stand on his own 2 feet, perhaps we can have coffee someday. But until then, I hold the only key to my front door, and the view from my balcony is absolutely perfect.